A rookie pitcher had just thrown like a no-hitter. And it was like the first time or something. So I went to go tell my wife about it. And I went to go talk to her. And as soon as I opened my mouth to speak, gibberish came out of my mouth. And so I was like, well, what the hell was that? And so I started again. And instead of saying baseball, like apple came out. And I couldn't put words together, and any word that came together and actually came out of my mouth was not what I intended to say. And so, me being the badass I was, I got in my car. Actually, I went to go do some chores. My wife came and grabbed me. She's like, you need to go to the hospital. And so, I'm a badass, so I got, yeah. I'm a badass, and it's like 6 o'clock in the morning. I'm getting ready for the workday, organizing some stuff, and I got in my car, took myself to the hospital, got there, and they said, you're having a stroke. And to me, like on the way to the hospital, fear was like, it was, yes, I'm not known for being smart, but I knew that there were, my ego said that my wife has things that still have to happen, kids have to wake up, they gotta get somewhere. I feel fine, I have a headache, I just can't talk. I get to the hospital, they say, you're having a stroke, they treat me for a stroke, put me in ICU for a while. Long story short, that was the most real fear I'd ever experienced in my life. And that comes from a combat veteran, all kinds of combat. I did Operation Iraqi Freedom, Enduring Freedom, went back to fight ISIS again in Iraq, spent time on the ground, spent time in a room just where I just literally hunted people all day. And so my experience with fear and death and tragedy was expansive at that point, but I'd never experienced anything like thinking I'm never gonna be able to talk to my children again. And for me, that was a big wake up, but I'm a badass. And so after I came back to it, fought with the military a little bit to keep me in, I thought, I'm good. But what I didn't realize is that looming in the background of never dealing with any kind of emotion or thinking about that shit because I'm a badass was some real heavy PTSD. And the way it manifested itself in me was fear. And that was never something that anybody knew on the outside. I came to work every day as a high-performing individual, receiving all the accolades. Everybody saying how good I did, inspiring people, but on the inside, shit was eating me alive. And I drove to work every day thinking, my family's gonna leave me. I'm gonna let them down, they're gonna leave me. I'm gonna give some bad advice and my unit's gonna fail. These guys, they're looking to me for their reason, as suicides are going up in the military, for their reason to stick around. How am I doing these things? I'm gonna fail. And that shit ate me up for a long time. And it wasn't until it was probably a year and a half, 2 years later when I had really spiraled and it had gotten out of control and life hadn't become unmanageable, but it became absolutely miserable for me. Externally, good. I'm like that, where's that movie where he talks about, he's like, look at my hand. I'm like, solid as rock. He's like, yeah, but this is my shooting hand, Externally, I was a rock. Internally, I was miserable. And I sat down with someone and they helped me frame some of those fears and dive into those things. And we're gonna talk a little bit about that tonight. Because those fears made me a straight bitch. Inside, right? Yeah. I didn't want anything to do with what was going on inside. Yeah. If I was working and actively executing, I was fine. But the last place I ever wanted to be was alone or inside my head. And that's where, when on a 45-minute drive to and from work every day, I drove myself insane. So we're gonna talk a little bit about fear and how to overcome some of those things, some tools, and how to really ultimately just make it your bitch, right? So that's the title of the class. How to make fear my bitch. And we're gonna do that today through some of the different techniques we'll talk about. But first we gotta understand a little bit more about what it is. All right, what is fear? It's a primal emotion. Sometimes it manifests itself differently in different people. For some people, it comes out as ego. Someone says, hey, we need to do this. And they say, no, I know how this, I've been doing this for 20 years. I know how it's supposed to go. That's just the fear that they're wrong, the fear of trying something different. Sometimes that pride takes over, and that's how the fear that they're experiencing manifests itself outwardly. Sometimes it's anger. Their fear manifests itself as anger, and then their personal problem that they have is now put upon someone else, right? So it manifests itself different ways, but it's because it's a physiological and a mental or emotional issue, right? So that physiological part is where legs start shaking, that fight or flight goes into motion, and your body is physically reacting to what you are experiencing in your mind psychologically, okay? So why is fear crucial for leaders? So to me, fear is a signal, right? Kind of like you have that check engine light on your dash. Fear is your chance to say what is going on, whether it's something that becomes an opportunity for you, or maybe it is a red light like, hey, something's wrong, you need to stop what you're doing. But as we face these fears and those red lights pop up, we have to choose how we handle those, and whether that is an all stop, I'm going to end what I'm doing, or if that is just a new starting point, okay? All right, recognizing the different types of fear. So up here's listed quite a few, and these are things that are very common fears. So fear of failure. This keeps a lot of people from doing anything. What's that old Wayne Gretzky quote? Anybody know it? You'd miss 100% of the shots you don't take. That fear that keeps people from taking shots is real. And you see it all the time, especially in the business world where there's a new opportunity for someone. There's a new opportunity for BlackBerry. Someone said, hey, we want to look at touchscreen phones. And BlackBerry lets fear say, nobody wants to use it. They want a real keyboard to type on. They want to see emails, and that's all they want to be able to do on their phone. And where's BlackBerry now, right? Kodak said, nobody wants to look at photos on a screen. We're going to stick to film and cameras. That's how people want to view their pictures. Where's Kodak now? These companies that were giants in the industry let fear or their ego, their pride say, we know what's best, let's not change it. And they let fear now make themselves stories in history books rather than the tech giants that they once were. The fear of rejection, I used to have that a lot. That's why I didn't have a lot of dates. Fear of the unknown, that's honestly, fear of the unknown, that's my comfort zone. But that took a lot of training to get to that point where I enjoy not knowing what's coming next. Maybe it's based on experience because I've spent so much time learning to anticipate what comes next that I've trained myself to where if something I don't know is about to happen, I love it. Give it to me. Fear of conflict. Yeah. Conflict is where we grow. If we don't view conflict as an opportunity to grow, we're viewing it wrong, straight up. Because that is not just for you to grow, but in an interaction. Yeah. It's kind of like sales. Sales isn't you calling someone and saying, do you want this? And then hanging up when they say no. The sales starts when they say no. Before that, it's just asking questions, right? Conflict is a chance for you to work through something. And some of the best work relationships I've ever had with the bosses started in conflict. I remember one, I had just come off an exercise up in the mountains in Bridgeport, out in California. I'd been up there for a month. I'd been understaffed. I didn't have a full leadership team to work with me, with the group of men I took up there. And I came back, and my new leadership, my counterpart, was there when we got off the bus. I was super impressed, like, great. This guy is here to participate and is ready to go. The very first work day together, he said something I disagreed with. It was having to do with like who can take time off, when can they take time off. And we went to the point where we had to go outside because we were screaming at each other.
What rank was he?
He was, at that time, a captain, and I was a staff sergeant.
You were a staff sergeant?
Yeah. And we went outside, we exchanged our words, we came to an agreement, and from that moment on, we were inseparable, best friends, in lockstep on everything. He just didn't have the full picture, and I didn't have his full vision. Yeah. But in that conflict, we came to a shared understanding of what he envisioned, and he understood where we had come from. Because this is a quick sidebar, but as you develop companies and change over leadership, the most dangerous thing you can do, in my mind, is move away from how a group of people used to do things. As you move away from the way they used to do things, you are intentionally or unintentionally isolating someone because you're saying you're doing it wrong. You should always move that company, that group of individuals, towards the new way you're going to do things. So rather than away from how you did it, like, we're not going to do it your way anymore because that says you did it wrong. You say, we are going to do it this way because we're moving forward and getting better. Does that make sense? Yeah. So when we would deploy to Iraq, we would go into Kuwait for a couple weeks before to acclimatize. And that works both ways. You acclimatize to discomfort or you acclimatize to comfort. And as you sit in an office job, which I've been guilty of before, where I sat in an office job, crushed on my computer all day. When people came in for the meetings, I dealt with it, moved on. And then it comes the time where I want to go see my guys, and I go outside and they're busting their asses, making shit happen, and I'm just miserable. But they're not, because they've acclimatized themselves to that hard work.
You fucking bet.
And it's that self-licking ice cream cone that what is it? I'm depressed because I'm fat. I eat because I'm depressed. I eat because I'm depressed. I'm depressed because I'm fat. Like, it all goes in a circle. Like, the more afraid I am of being uncomfortable, the less capable I am of being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And so when that day comes, whether it's your car breaking down in Yucca Valley or
It's hotter than fuck.
you have to go out and shovel your snow, that frame of reference doesn't sit in your mind. I can tell you, from my personal experience, the greatest team building I have ever done in my life was the times when I was miserable with other people. Because it builds camaraderie faster than anything else can. The times I was,
You embrace that shit.
yeah, and thrive on it. All right. Fear is motivation, not paralysis. We're going to talk about that here a little bit later.
You gotta have a specific example.
I do.
Just a short story.
I do.
Okay.
So,
Oh, I got one too.
I do. I got Barry Heaton. Barry Heaton was my guy. I came out off a deployment, and they gave me Barry Heaton and Chad Campfasuk. Chad Campfasuk was my primary communicator. He did not speak English. I was so nervous about him going to combat with me. And then they gave me Barry. Barry was slow and overweight. And so they gave me this new team, and I had 5 months between when I came off deployment and when I was going back. And so I'm looking at this team. I worked with them for a few weeks, and I went and said, hey, I can't take this team. Like, I am team one, and team one gets their pick of the mission. I want to pick a good mission, and I can't take these guys on a good mission. And so I had written those guys off. That was a big failure of leadership on my part. I attribute my life to both of those men. We got there. Barry, over the next 5 months, had grown, gotten in better shape, didn't really change size. He just wore a bigger flak jacket. But the thing you could never measure in an individual is how they're going to react when they're afraid. But we had, time and time again, trained to it. And I remember the very first time we took contact, we were in this orchard. A grenade goes over a wall towards us. That was my first time in contact with the Danish battle group that I was attached to, and they say grenade a little bit different from us. So we were caught a little off guard by the grenade, even though they yelled it in Danish. And I knew my job at that point was to get some high ground so I could see, so I could talk to the aircraft and put bombs on the enemy. And I took off running across the field. I said, hey, I'm going up on top of that hill. I went running across the field. I get to the other side, or I get to the hill to start climbing it, and I turn around, and Barry's right behind me. And I had never expected in my life that he was going to be the guy behind me. But he had trained to prevent that paralysis. And I've seen the opposite. The guys that were the toughest dudes I'd ever met in my life until that first round was fired. And that moment that their plan went out the window, You never know who that's going to be until you hit that moment. But that paralysis will take over. But we can train to that, and we're going to talk about how to eliminate that in individuals. So the goal here is that we turn fear from our foe to our ally. So that we can take that fear and, kind of like you do with like a torch, when you turn on a torch, you have to twist that knob until you get that fire to the right point, right? I'm not a welder, so I don't know what that point is supposed to look like, but you have to dial it in to get that right. The same as a jet engine. You're not going to use a jet engine to light a candle. It's too big. You have to focus it down and use it as an ally. And we're going to go through some methods to utilize fear as a tool for you, not just to build yourself, but also to build your team and let it benefit you in the long run. All right. Acknowledging and naming your fear. So this is how we do it. Acknowledging and naming your fear. Because it's very easy to say, like, that shit's scary. But if you drill down and identify what that true fear is, then you can start to deal with it. For me, like, I'm afraid my family's going to leave me. Well, that's scary, right? That's a fear I used to live with. It wasn't until someone set me down and said, why? Well, because sometimes I fail at things and I'm going to let them down and they're going to leave me. Do they think you're a failure? No. Have they ever said you let them down? No, I work really hard for my family. So where's this fear based in? Is it a rational fear or an irrational? Well, I guess it's irrational. Why am I worrying about this? And we can pick through fears after we name them and drill down. Is this rational? Is this based in reality? Is there actually a threat here? Or am I just letting my mind take over? And as we dissect those fears, we can move through them and eliminate them off our list. Okay? And reframe failure. So, there's a book I highly recommend called Think Again. Okay? It's an Adam Grant book. He's an organizational psychologist. But he challenges people to look at failures as an opportunity, like a scientist does. A scientist doesn't look at a failed experiment and say, we failed. They look at it and say, all right, we learned it's not that one, right? We learned. And you take that opportunity that came from failure that made you better. Every failure is an opportunity to get better because you know that formula didn't work. How do we reframe that formula? How do we tweak that formula to make it work? How bad did we miss? Okay, let's adjust it and do it again. So if you have a fear of failure, you're looking at failure wrong. Failure means you learned, you got better. And when you can reframe it and welcome the opportunities to learn, then you're willing to take more risk. Because if you take enough risks, you're going to fail eventually. Whether it's big or small, I'm not saying go bet your payroll on scratch tickets because you want to better your company, you want to give yourself more capital, but take some risks so that you give yourself the opportunity to get better or fail. And if you never experience failure, good on you.
Good on you. You think so?
No, but like you're awesome. If you don't ever experience failure, you're honestly in your comfort zone. Okay, get out of your comfort zone. You're not dreaming big enough. If you're that good, you are not dreaming big enough. If you never experienced failure, you should be the next Elon Musk. You should be running Amazon, something like that. But even those guys, they don't get there by never failing. I mean, who's seen a Cybertruck? What a failure. But Elon Musk, he had to embrace those failures as an opportunity to learn.
That's how you fucking learn.
Yeah.
The electric car industry is still a failure.
Can you talk about framing? Because I don't want to assume that everybody understands what you mean by reframing. That's very powerful.
It is.
So could you just...
Yeah.
What does that mean?
And so I'm going to give some tools here a little bit later. And on the back, we'll talk about the Ferris something method, which is a way. So this reframing it's very rooted in cognitive behavioral therapy. And what it is just looking at looking deeply at a problem or a situation and understanding it through a different lens. And I tell you, the most powerful thing you can do with a fear is talk about it with another human being. It requires being vulnerable. But when you say something out loud, like, I'm afraid of this, and they say, why? The second you said, I'm afraid of this, you took a little bit of power away from it because you put it in words. That's why every AA meeting starts with, hi, my name is so-and-so, I'm an alcoholic, because they take a little bit of power away from that. And when you can say, I'm afraid of my being fired on Monday, you took a little bit of power away from it. And when someone says, why? Well, I had this report and I got it in 10 minutes late. Did they know you got it in late? A little bit of power away. No, they didn't. Well, why are you afraid then? Well, I think they might find out. Well, do they normally fire people when they get their reports in late? No, not that I know of. Well, do people disappear? Because reports are late all the time. Are there people missing that weren't there last week? Or they were there by last week? No. So maybe that's not a fear based in reality. Maybe that's a fear that you've perceived that you're now dwelling on that's keeping you from performing. Because that's the funny thing about fears is if I'm afraid, if I'm so worried about what's going to happen if I don't get something done, I am taking some of my brain power, I'm taking some of my effort, some of my energy that I have for the day to accomplish that, and I'm taking it away from that to put it into that fear. So I'm essentially making the problem worse because I'm worrying about it. And we do that a lot as human beings, is we worry about stuff that we can't control yet, or we worry about things that aren't a big deal, and we focus on those things rather than just doing those things. Does that make sense? And there's a tool we'll briefly go through at the end that I attached on the back of your worksheets that I think is very helpful. It's a very in-depth way to do it. All right, so take small, courageous actions, okay? So like anything, the more we do something, the better we're gonna get at it. And it becomes automaticity, that muscle memory. And a lot of the people I've worked with and the organizations I've worked with, we built fear into everything we did so that we were ready for it. So we always what-ifed every situation. We're preparing to go out on a convoy. What if we get hit? Well, who got hit? The front vehicle, okay? What does the second vehicle do? Well, they're going to peel off to the right, set security. What's the third vehicle? They're going to roll up, set security on the other side. What's the fourth one do? They pull up behind it, and they assess the situation and try to provide medical support. Okay, what's in that first vehicle? Well, that's where our radio is. Okay, what other vehicle has a radio? And we walk through problems like this to understand where we need to put our gear, where we need to put our equipment, and we create these situations of fear, of stress, so that in the moment, we already thought about them. We already had the plan for it.
80 different solutions.
Yeah, we planned 80 different solutions. And you can do the same thing in the business world. What if I don't make... You should. What if I don't make enough sales this week? Well, we have this money over here that could make payroll for this week, or we could put more effort into collections, right? What if someone doesn't pay us for this giant job? Well, how much could they pay us? Could they give us half the check before we finished? But you got to start looking at all the different possibilities and thinking through these solutions so that in the moment, when it happens, you already know what plan B and plan C is. Now it's just the only challenge you have is the person I need to tell what the plan is next to me, or do I have to call them, right? Because you should be able to think through these things. And I do the same thing in my personal life as I'm doing things. Like, all right, I know it's a Monday morning. My daughter worked last night. What if she doesn't wake up? Okay, she's going to be late. So if she's late, does that mean I need to take my other daughter? Well, depends. And if it's after 6:30, if it's 6:30, she can still catch the bus. But if it's after 6:30, I'm going to have to take her. How does that affect the next thing in my morning? Well, I'm good. And then sometimes you just realize, I could just go wake her up, and then the problem's gone. Otherwise, you already have the plan in place, and it's just a matter of executing that plan how you've already set it up. All right, leading others through fear, okay? This is something you just have to work on as an individual in order to be able to do it as a team. Because the step one of leading a group through fear is lead by example. So if you haven't prepared yourself to do it, then you're not prepared to lead them to do it, okay? So step one is going through the motions yourself, figuring out what the fears are, lead by, so you're capable of leading by example. Because if you're not, someone's gonna step up. And hopefully you did your job and you trained someone well enough. And then normalize fear in the workplace. So I was a little hesitant to put that bullet on there because you never want to work in a workplace where everybody's afraid they're going to get fired, right? But normalizing the thought process of what happens if something goes wrong should be welcome. You should welcome that in an environment. And I do it all the time in meetings. Like, what happens if we don't make it on time? Well, the contractor can't start. Well, can we tell them to go ahead and start if we don't make it on time? Or do we have something that they need in order to start their job for the day? We do. Can we just send it now so that we avoid that problem? Going through these processes and what-ifing every situation so that you know what the problems are and you get your team thinking that way. Because, I'm going to try to keep this on time, George. So we always did what was called a confirmation brief. And before every operation, we did a confirmation brief. And that is where someone steps up and says, this is the plan. These are all the things in place that we have done. And that confirmation brief is given to the commander. But it's not for the commander. It's for the person executing. Because knowing that they're going to stand in front of the commander and tell him their plan, and he's going to say, what about this? What about this? What about this? Means that in their preparation, they have now thought through all of the problems. And if you can build that mentality at a workplace, if someone can say, this is our plan for this week, and you start asking questions that say, well, what if this doesn't happen? What if this goes wrong? Then you start getting them in the mindset that I think he might ask this. I need to be prepared to ask it or to answer it. And if you get people in that mindset where they're constantly thinking about what's the boss going to ask? What did I not think of? What's the backup plan? What's the third plan if that backup plan fails? You will empower that team to not have to call you every time something goes wrong. So let me go back. The last point I had on this one was support growth, okay? And we develop, because we have to support that in our organizations. And to me, I can see when a lot of people are afraid. You can see the nervous actions when someone's talking or telling you what's happening. And the most powerful thing you can do as a leader is give them the good job. Like, good job. Hey, you look a little nervous. You killed it. Just keep doing it that exact way, okay? Because then you're supporting that growth. You let them know that they got that good. You take a little bit of that edge off of that fear so that now they know how to do it better, how to continue to do it the next time, or what to improve. But if you let them know, and you can also say like, hey, here's what you should have done, but otherwise it sounded great. You're empowering them to grow, and you building on their capabilities, because that confidence is one of the most powerful tools to defeat fear. If they're confident in what they're doing, because someone said you're doing a good job, most importantly, the person that is judging how well of a job they do, if that person tells them they're doing a good job, then you give them a little bit of freedom to continue to succeed. Otherwise, that fear could lead to a point where they either leave that organization or quit performing at the level you want them to because they get that paralysis from not doing it. All right. Fear setting example exercise. So on the back of those pieces of paper, I put on there the fear setting exercise. This is something that a guy named Tim Ferriss came up with. So Tim Ferriss had a company that he had started growing, and as it continued to get bigger, it was almost an exponential growth. And fear started setting in on him, which to me is almost another one of those irrational thoughts. I was so successful, my company is growing so fast. That was the type of problem he had. And fear started becoming a giant thing for him to where he took some time off and had to step away from his company to deal with that fear. And so these are the ways that he did it. You take 3 pieces of paper, just like on the back there, and the first one you put define, prevent, and repair. And you're just going through and lining out what the fear is, what the problem is you're afraid of, and then put a 4 to 10, or a number 1 through 10 of how far that would set you back. Whether that's that program, that project, your company as a whole, what it's threatening, right? What you can do to prevent it is the next column, and then how long or what it would take to repair it should your fear come to reality, right? And then the next page is what might be the benefits of an attempt or partial success. This is where you kind of put into words, if I do this, despite the risks that are my fears, if I attempt it, what are going to be the costs? What are going to be the benefits? If I have partial success, what are going to be the benefits? Because you already know if you're facing something that you're afraid of, you probably already identified what the benefits are if you succeed, right? If I acquire this company, what the benefits are. The fear is where you have to understand, like, what is the threat if I am not successful, or I'm only partially successful. And then on the third page is the cost, the emotional, the physical, and financial costs of inaction. So if you don't do this, what are the costs? And if you can write these things out, they will help eliminate that fear. Because after you've done all this work and you've understood that fear from every angle, the threats, the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities that it presents, then you'll have your answer on what decision you need to make. And you'll better be prepared to execute despite that fear, and that fear will probably be non-existent. Because you already know everything about it, right? It's like, I'm afraid of getting in my car and driving, which is the most dangerous thing we do every day. But nobody wakes up in the morning, I'm sure there's somebody, but is standing in front of the mirror sweating because they're so afraid that they're going to get in their car and have an accident. That's not the first thought, even though it's the most dangerous thing we do in most Americans' lives, right? But if you know that I have this GPS, and that GPS is going to tell me where the threats are along the way. There's a crash on I-40, okay? Well, can I take the turnpike instead? Yes, I can take the turnpike instead. That's an option. That GPS, the same as your mind and fear, tells you where the threats are and what route you can go that's safe. But it also may just tell you, like, how do I plan, in case this fear comes true, how do I plan to where it doesn't become a problem? You know, if I'm afraid of getting a flat tire, is there anything I can do to prevent that? Well, maybe check my tires regularly, go on better roads that are better maintained, get AAA so that if it happens, it doesn't wreck my day. You put these tools in place, then you take some of that power away from that fear.
You have no more reason to be afraid.
Yeah.
Right?
And you're
Get your shit squared away, so that now you have no reason to be afraid.
But if you're doing these things, you'll be surprised dealing with the fear. If you go through these process of naming it, use something like the Tim Ferriss, the fear setting examples, working through that, you'll start to do that with other things in your life that are not fears. And you'll see the results of the thought, putting the thought into it, the decisions you make, to the actions, to the interactions you have with people. The relationships you have with people, you'll be able to analyze those a little bit better so you understand what actions, what words you say that get what reaction, and come out of those situations in a better place, okay? Mindfulness and stress management. If you are dealing with fear, cognitive behavioral therapy is one of the most powerful things. You can Google how to do cognitive behavioral therapy for fear. It's a lot about what we're talking, where we're naming your fears and deciding if it's irrational or irrational, but you can work through those fears. I just recommend that you do it with another person. You talk through this with a trusted confidant, a mentor. You can call me for all I care, because saying it to another person takes the power right out of it. It's like taking the wind out of the sails. And then accountability and support. When you know that you have people that are going to hold you accountable, it makes things a lot easier to overcome fear, right? Like, I retired from the Marine Corps almost 2 months ago now. And I had no intention of ever going back to the gym for any reason, ever putting on running shoes, except for mowing the yard, because I have running shoes that I'm not using for anything else, right? But joining an accountability group where I know every damn morning I'm going to get text messages about someone at the gym overcomes like fear of discomfort, and now I go to the gym. Because I'm not going to be in a group of people where I'm not performing to the same level, right? But that accountability will keep you doing things that you're supposed to, despite fear, or it'll give you the network to help you get through that fear, okay? And that's what this group is for. The accountability and support, the networking, the learning, we're all here for the same thing. And if we can't do that in a group where we came intentionally for the accountability, the support, you joined an app where someone's going to say, I went to the gym this morning every morning, and you're going to stay in that group, you want some kind of accountability in your life. But that is a tool to help you get better and overcome those fears.
Yeah, didn't Kurt Rochelle say accountability bridges the gap between intention and action?
Say it one more time.
Accountability bridges the gap between intentions and action. So like I wanted to do this, like I meant to do this, versus you had the accountability and you did do those things.
Absolutely. And using accountability to create habits is one of the most powerful things you can do. Because creating habits can be difficult. But the easiest way to do it is tell someone what your intention is. And when you tell someone, I'm going to become a runner, and you say, call me every day to make sure I went and ran, you're going to go run. Because you don't want to call and say, hey, did you go run today? And you'd be like, no, I was tired. Loser. I ate ice cream instead, you know? All right. Breaking the cycle of fear and action, okay? That's ultimately, we've already talked about this a lot. You're building that resilience. Every time you face that fear, you're building the automaticity on how to deal with it. You're putting your tools into place where they become second nature, to where you're no longer sitting down with 3 pieces of paper and going through what Tim Ferriss thinks the best process is to overcome fear, but you're actually built your own process, and it happens automatically in your mind. When you start doing these things and making it a habit and doing it regularly, it becomes second nature. And so sometimes you get to the point where you don't even recognize that was a fear. You say, oh, I had some hesitance, but you walked straight away from it because you already went through the process of that decision cycle, analyzed it, and came up with the best course of action, what the threats were, what the opportunities were, and you move forward. And you won't even realize it eventually that you're working through it. It just becomes second nature. All right. So I hope this was helpful. Coming from someone who's been in that place of nearly paralyzing fear and living in that miserable life where fear was taking over every thought that was free, every moment that I didn't have someone to interact with. Don't live that way. If you're in that place or ever find yourself in that place, call me. Because the best thing you can do is talk to someone about it. Because as soon as you say, this is what's going on, you will automatically start to feel a little bit better. And it doesn't take a whole lot of questions to get from what is it to that's irrational and just lift that weight off your shoulder, right? I always think of it as, I'm used to carrying a ruck on my back, a big hiking backpack full of military gear, right? And the one thing I never did was walk around and continue to pick things up and throw it in. But every day we do that with our emotions and our mental capacity. We walk around life and saying, there's a problem. Let me put that problem in my bag and let me think about it. Rather than saying like, I don't have to pick that up. I can leave that there today. Our natural habit is, let me pick that 40-pound problem up that I have no business dealing with because it's not important right now. Let me put it in my bag and carry it the entire day. And we do that with fears. We do that with relationships. We do that with any number of things in our life that we don't need to pick up, but we do it, and we don't think about it. And then at the end of the day, we're like, why am I so tired? My shoulders hurt, my neck hurts, I have a headache, I'm dehydrated. Let me grab a beer. But don't pick that shit up. So, any questions on fear? Any comments on fear?